Hello and welcome to The Digital Insight, the technology, procurement and supply chain podcast that delivers valuable C-level perspective into the core issues surrounding business transformation and digital disruption. Each episode will bring you the most inspiring executive insights from those who are leading transformation strategies within the world's biggest and best-known companies. The Digital Insight. Disrupt, transform, evolve.
Welcome to The Digital Insight, the official podcast series for CPO Strategy and Interface magazines. My name is Dale, and today we explore AI in the digital transformation of procurement. Greg Watts joins me in the hot seat, and he is CEO of Findr, an AI-powered platform designed to automate the multiple manual steps involved in creating effective commercial partnerships, a vital cog in the world of procurement. Greg and I also explore the appetite for AI and whether there's a readiness to match this appetite. We also look at how COVID pandemic has impacted the AI conversation for better or worse, and we try and identify why exactly, for all the proclamations of shining examples of an AI in procurement, that we are yet to see the true impact and true value that AI can bring. Greg, welcome to the show.
Dale, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me to the podcast.
No, absolutely. And always like to kick off by finding out who we're talking to and effectively why are they on the show. So for our listeners and for me, can you kind of give me a bit of an introduction as to who you are and your experience, and kind of your understanding and connections with the procurement space?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll start by saying that some journalists have recently described me as the matchmaker, which will make sense shortly, which I think makes me sound like some kind of dating baron, which I certainly am not. But to give you more of a kind of a serious intro, so I was formerly head of market acceleration at Visa Europe, and I was responsible for creating partnerships with all of the major retailers and financial institutions across Europe. I then went on to found my own growth consultancy called Demand Creation Partners, which helps fintechs to create partnerships with their target partners. So we've helped a number of fintechs of all sizes to create partnerships with some of the leading retailers and financial institutions, principally in the UK, but also in some other markets as well. But it's always been a dream of mine, if you like, to automate the creation of commercial partnerships. So typically, creating a partnership with maybe a tier one retailer or tier one bank could take anything up to 2 years, and that's if you know what you're doing. I remember at Visa, I created partnerships with a leading petroleum company, and that took 2 years, and that was with the brand and the budget of Visa behind me, and obviously with all the resources that brought. And I've always thought that with startups, of which fintechs are one part, if it takes so long to create these partnerships, then many of them run out of money in the process. And unsurprisingly, we see these insights of, depending on what source you look at, 70, 80, 90% of startups fail in the first year. And I just always thought that that's terrible. So I've had this dream for quite a long time of fundamentally creating, again, what some journalists have described as a dating platform for businesses. So I call it a matching platform, but some people have described it as a dating platform. So we're building Findr, whereby Dale can come onto the platform and tell the platform who he is, and crucially the types of partnerships that he's looking for, and then he can then request to match with those partners that we put forward to him based on what he's looking for. If his match request is accepted, he can then hold a discovery call within the platform, and he'll just pay a small fee, perhaps £99 once that discovery call has happened. But that really cuts down all of the time it takes for Dale to have otherwise found the company, find the right decision makers within the business, connect with them, which can take months, if not years. So we're cutting all of that down. So we're building out Findr really to cut down the time it takes to create commercial partnerships from months or years to minutes or hours in just a few clicks. So I'll stop talking shortly, but we've made quite a lot of progress in a short period of time. And your listeners might be interested to know that we incorporated the business on March the 10th. And then a few days later, a little thing called COVID hit. So we've been building out the platform with the backdrop of the pandemic. But it's actually been quite good timing for us in many ways, because we're all about creating or automating partnerships, if you like. So there's no need for physical interaction with us. There's no need for a handshake. We're not naive enough to think that we'd completely cut out the handshake, but certainly we've now got a platform where businesses can come onto it to tell us who they are, what they're looking for, and then connect with key decision makers that have got live projects within a very short period of time. So that's what we're doing. And some people have described us, as I mentioned at the start, as a dating platform for businesses, which we're quite happy with, because that's fundamentally what we are. So we've been looking at Tinder, we've been looking at Grindr, we've been looking at Match.com, we've been looking at eHarmony to take best practice from them. So that's what we're doing. But in terms of how we are helping procurement teams, it's worth obviously spending some time on that. So having worked in many large corporates myself, and my last role was at Visa, I'm acutely aware of how procurement teams work and function. And there's always been, in my view, kind of a gap with how they can support their stakeholders in a more, I don't want to say digital, but that's probably the right word, more of a digital effective way. So I think, again, your listeners may roll their eyes at this, but I'll say it in the spirit of being also controversial, that procurement can often be seen within organisations as sometimes holding other teams back, and they can sometimes struggle to demonstrate the value that they bring to organisations. Obviously, I don't believe that myself, but nevertheless, that is a perception that I think that perhaps some corporate citizens have. We're going to be offering Findr as a tool to procurement teams to help capture the requirements of their stakeholders. So we will be offering them Findr as a tool to help them further demonstrate that value that they're offering to their stakeholders, in this case, by giving them a platform that they can provide their requirements, so post projects, for example, and then they can get connected with relevant decision makers across target partners within a matter of minutes or hours. So procurement will be able to use Findr to really help cut down the time it takes for their stakeholders to create the partnerships that they're looking for.
But it's fascinating, and one thing I'm going to pick out there is that you said, and many people have said it to me in different ways, is that you talked about that procurement's image of it holds people back. I've had people describe it as almost a police squad as part of the business, that kind of, people have all these great ideas and then procurement comes in and says, well, it's okay. And more often than not, people say procurement will tell you no. But you've obviously got this understanding that, and it's a very true understanding that procurement is so much more than that. And in recent years, and not just recent years, but more, it seems to have accelerated a lot more in recent years, the conversations in procurement have become much more around, as you said, digital enablement and being more digitally connected, and automation becomes into that, and efficiency, and just sort of to wrap it all up under this big term, digital transformation. Looking over the last few years and looking obviously particularly with your work with Findr, just how have you seen some of those procurement conversations change, some of those perceptions change because of technology?
Yeah, I'd say a few things. First of all, I'd say that when I had a corporate career, I always made it my mission to create my own partnerships, deep relationships with my procurement colleagues, because I obviously saw, I saw that by doing so, I was able to create, a strong partnership, which resulted in procurement being able to help me in turn to fulfill my requirements. But I also saw so many of my colleagues not necessarily seeing the value of building those relationships with our procurement colleagues. And I think, unfortunately, to use your kind of example, that procurement still are seen as perhaps holding their stakeholders back, rightly or wrongly. I mean, as we're building out Findr, we've obviously spoken to lots of procurement teams as well, and they've also said that unfortunately that is still a perception which is held quite widely. I don't think that technology has been embraced enough, or enough, or indeed we've seen enough digital transformation of the procurement space yet. I think people talk about how procurement has become more innovative and how there are more tools to help it become, to help it transform digitally. But I haven't really seen that many tools that are helping to do that. And obviously we're biased at Findr, but we see Findr as a tool to finally really help them to offer something to their stakeholders, which isn't going to be seen as some kind of noose or rope to hold their stakeholders back, but rather a tool which can help their stakeholders to capture their requirements and connect with key decision makers at their target partners, as we mentioned, in a matter of minutes or hours and just a few clicks. So we're going to be launching to our beta group in early October. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But as part of that beta group, we've got a good couple hundred people that have signed up for early beta access. And if your listeners are interested, they can do so at www.findr.global. That's Findr, Findr.global. And when we launch in October, a lot of procurement teams will be able to use us and test us to offer to their stakeholders. And we're going to be getting a lot of obviously data from that to demonstrate to future new users that by using Findr, it does radically cut down the time it takes to create partnerships from months or years to minutes or hours in just a few clicks. And so the procurement teams in turn can then use some of those data points, which will help to change, or I don't want to say change the perception of them, but to help reinforce the perception that procurement are hugely valuable to function within organisations that will never hold stakeholders back, but actually they'll do their damnedest to accelerate them. So that's where the AI comes in. I think it's probably a good segue into the AI bit that we're incorporating, that your listeners probably will be quite interested to hear. So we're using AI, or more accurately, machine learning, and underneath that we call that predictive data classifications to capture specific stakeholder requirements. So let's say, for example, the head of partnerships for JP Morgan wants to undertake a POC with a crypto fintech. They'll be able to use the platform to come on and tell Findr exactly that they want to create a crypto POC, and they can specify the types of, in this case, crypto businesses that they want to work with. And then they'll be able to connect with relevant crypto businesses that match that criteria. So that's where our machine learning jumps in. And over time, we using what we're calling our matching algorithm, we will then just keep matching and matching and matching users based on a common criteria. So that's where machine learning kicks in. I am not a technologist, just so your listeners are clear on that. However, I do have a fantastic technical co-founder who does have a PhD in machine learning. So I'm in safe hands. But it's actually worth mentioning as well. And again, I don't know whether this will resonate, but I'll say it anyway. That lots of companies these days, whether they're matching platforms like ours or otherwise, claim to use AI in some way, shape, or form, and so many of them don't. So many of them, they're just kind of macro-driven Excel spreadsheets. But I'm pleased to say that we are using, in our case, machine learning. In our case, to accelerate the time it takes for businesses to create partnerships with one another. So, but I was particularly excited when you invited me on here, because we are speaking to, procurement teams are our target, are our primary users. So hopefully we can create a few case studies, and hopefully I can come back in 6 months' time with some good things that your procurement teams can take away to say, using Findr, actually we really help our stakeholders to radically cut down the time it takes to create partnerships.
Yeah. And you speak to something quite, something that I'm always keen to kind of pick apart at, and I don't want to use the word expose, but, just sort of address, is that there is a lot of talk. There is in procurement, and looking at that digital transformation, as an example, there is so much talk about it, about companies are so keen to show off and to say, look what we're doing, we're digitally transforming, we're implementing new technologies, we're making things much more efficient and effective. But then, like you said, and other people have said the same, you drill down into that, and it's not just talk. There's obviously some work been done, but not enough to sort of almost warrant the headlines and the bluster. And so what that creates then obviously is this weird situation where a company like yourself comes around, where you are actually doing that. You're actually utilizing the technology, the tools, in a way that others just aren't quite doing. But because the others have sort of spoken so much about it, that it's almost, people have kind of become a little, I don't want to say deaf, but they kind of turn their backs and turn away from, it's just AI. So many people talk about AI. What makes you any different? Like, how do you kind of go about overcoming that and sort of saying, look, we're not just telling you this is what we do, it is what we do, versus the type of people who are just sort of saying it because it sounds good to say that they're working with AI?
Yeah, no, and I must say, actually, it's so nice to actually kind of not unwrap, but just kind of get it on the table in many ways. That, as you say, and as we both say, that everyone talks about digital transformation and AI, and they all talk a good game about how it's all being embraced. But I've seen so few examples of it. This is perhaps a topic for another podcast. But it really not. It's just the terms are being used, but I don't really see the technologies being applied. A couple of things, I guess. So by virtue of my co-founder, he's a machine learning expert. We made it our mission very early on to apply machine learning to this problem because we know that it can be fixed using machine learning. So that's what we're doing. We're just to give you kind of where we are with the business. So when COVID struck in middle of March, we'd only had the business, as I mentioned, incorporated a few days earlier. So we've all been at home, I guess, kind of applying our own principles of building our business virtually, because we haven't all been together. And as a result, we've been incredibly productive because we haven't been darting around London, going from meeting to meeting to meeting. We've all been at home, whether it's in London or in other parts of the UK, in fact, in other parts of the world, just building out the platform. And so we're kind of living and breathing our own values that you can build, in our case, businesses and more widely partnerships without being physically together. Going back to kind of where we are with our progress, if you like. So we incorporated the business, lockdown happened, we've been building out the platform. We've just completed all of our UI and UX work, and now we have our fantastic development partners based in Poland, a company called Ops Talent, who I would recommend highly, building out the platform. And what we're going to be doing over the summer is using our beta group, of who we've got about 250 people signed up now. We're going to use that group to user test over the summer, of which there are lots of procurement teams on there. And then we're going to launch it in October to that beta group. And we're going to launch it to start with to the financial services industry. So what we're going to be doing is launching industry by industry, because as much as we'd like to launch to all businesses from day one, that's just not possible, because we won't have all of the user requirements for all of the businesses in the UK. So we're going to start by launching to the financial services industry, first of all, within our beta group. And then Q1 next year, we'll then expand it out to the wider financial services industry. And then what we'll do in about Q2, Q3 is then launch to another industry, perhaps insurance or retail. So we're going to launch industry by industry. And by taking that approach, we're going to be in a very measured way, gathering very specific user requirements. So then this time, in a year's time, we'll have 3 or 4 industries live in the UK, and we'll have thousands of people using the platform, and hopefully thousands of procurement teams using the platform. And then hopefully in a few months' time, I'll be able to come back to you and say, well, using Findr, we've got multiple examples now where we've helped businesses and procurement teams, businesses full stop, to cut down the time it takes to create partnerships from months or years to minutes or hours in just a few clicks. So that's what we're doing. I guess in terms of some other bits just to share with your listeners, in terms of what it's like to start a business in the middle of a pandemic, we in our case, I'm chuckling because who of us knew this was all going to happen? But in our case, it has been good timing, because we are all about creating virtual partnerships in minutes or hours and just a few clicks. And so, as I mentioned a minute ago, just being at home, building out the business virtually is what we're doing. And we speak to potential investors and other partners spread all across the world every single day. And we're huge advocates that business doesn't need to be done and shouldn't be done anymore through handshakes and, dare I say it, with stuffy suits. We think it should be able to be done virtually. It's just also worth probably touching on government stuff as well, which is always maybe a controversial point. We think that at Findr, we believe, obviously many people around the country, across the world, in fact, are in very tricky situations when it comes to jobs, and many businesses are struggling to survive. And the government here and governments all around the world have done good jobs in terms of providing things like furlough schemes or access to loans, or et cetera, which is all good. But we believe that at a government level, not just at a business level, but at a government level, at a society level, that government should also be investing in technologies like Findr, and obviously we are biased, but absolutely like Findr, to help businesses come out of this pandemic. So loans and the furlough schemes are all very good, but they're not sustainable. We'd much rather see we'd much rather see technology created, whether it's by government or private companies like ours, which helps businesses, in our case, to create virtual partnerships to come out of the pandemic. So, and I haven't really seen many examples of that. I mean, we were in an article in Forbes a couple of weeks ago as part of 5 startups doing that. But I haven't actually come across, apart from the ones in that article, many businesses who are actually trying to create technology to help businesses come out of this dire situation. So we do that. That's one of the things that we do. But I'm hopeful that other businesses will pop up and create technologies that can help businesses to not just to survive, but to thrive ultimately.
So going back then a little bit then, so we've mentioned that it's of course it's AI, and more specifically it's machine learning, and these are words, these are phrases that have been spoken on this podcast a lot and have been said to me when discussing, like I say, digital transformation and the kind of this new look procurement. But I'm always curious as to where we are in terms of a maturity level. So again, based on those sort of conversations and the people you've spoken to and your experience you've got with the kind of procurement people, what's the appetite like versus the actual readiness to embrace AI?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, the appetite is absolutely there. I think from all of our conversations with procurement teams and indeed across the wider business community, there's a huge hunger to embrace technologies, of which AI is one part, to help them to grow. But in my experience, at least from what I've seen, as we mentioned earlier, I haven't seen many businesses to truly offer AI, or in our case, machine learning. I still see lots of manual processes exist. I still see lots of things which are Excel driven, for want of a better word. I still see lots and lots of hours and time and resources go in particular to procurement processes, to RFP processes, identifying potential partners, shortlisting potential partners. I mean, the whole RFP process is just so long, and as we talked about at the start, it can often take months, if not years. I was out on Friday with a potential investor who's worked at a major UK bank at a very senior level, and he said, "Well, Greg, Findr is fantastic, and we're going to be using it." But he said, "But the problem that we have is that." In his case, our procurement team within our bank could take up to a year just to get you as Findr, on our, registered as a business. To which I told him that actually, with his particular bank, the head of strategy has actually already signed up for early beta access, which made us both smile. But so I would say that there's a deeper problem within large organisations where it's ridiculous that it takes up to a year to get onto procurement processes and partner lists. And so I think that businesses, in particular procurement teams, have got an opportunity to really look at themselves and say, how can we make it easier for other businesses to partner with us and to do business? And I'm sure many of them would say, well, we've made improvements in all these areas. But I would challenge that and say, well, if you have really made improvements, then it should be possible to onboard a partner within a matter of hours, in my view. And AI can, and in our case, machine learning can help with that. So with Findr, as obviously as an example, procurement teams now have an opportunity to use it to connect with decision makers within businesses who they want to work with, literally within a matter of minutes and hours and just a few clicks. Now, whether procurement teams will embrace it remains to be seen. I mean, we've certainly been told that many want to and many will. And in our case, we've got many people signed up for early beta access. So I'm very confident that it will be embraced. But it's going to be interesting to see how many particularly larger businesses and procurement teams within larger businesses perhaps don't use it or don't embrace it. And I'm going to be very curious to see why. I think there's a real kind of lethargy, if you like, or kind of overhang of procurement teams, and it's not just procurement teams. We shouldn't have a go at procurement teams. It's all businesses. They say that they embrace technology, and they want to embrace technology to make business go faster in whatever way that is. But but then they have internal systems which hold them back, or behaviors which hold them back. So I think there's a more kind of behavioral challenge that organizations need to face up to, which is, do we really want to move at a pace that we believe that we can do? I think that's a bigger question. Do they really want to, or are they scared? Because the technology is starting to emerge that can help them to accelerate. Obviously, we're here talking about Findr, and we're going to be launching in October. But is there the real desire, the real behavior, the real passion to embrace these technologies? That's going to be an interesting one to see. Well, I mean, what are your views, speaking to procurement executives, Dale? I mean, do you think that they really have the appetite to change and to adopt new technologies? Do you think that they're willing to take that, not risk, but leap of faith and change their behaviours?
Well, I think you've kind of answered that question, and a future question that I was going to ask was absolutely yes. There's definitely an appetite there. It's because people are very. I know we sort of talked earlier about how it's easy for people to fall victim to the trappings of talking about technology, to just champion, yep, we're investing in this, we're investing in that, and this is helping us do this, without ever truly revealing, not necessarily revealing, but sort of showing the real value add that's come from it. But the appetite is absolutely there. It's just when I ask people, like you said, you're curious and you're kind of excited to find out as to why people aren't, investing, or why people might think that's not for them, even though it's very clear there's a business case there. It comes down to, like you said, then risk, that leap of faith. And what's been particularly interesting in recent months is obviously with what's happened with COVID, is that it's forced businesses to look inwards differently than they would have ever done before. So procurement, for example, it's kind of got this traditional view of it's looking at the costs, it's checking the bottom line and making sure things are all right, and can we make a saving there, when actually it's more about finding, basically it's become more strategic and more central to a business in terms of growth and in terms of innovation, and just in terms of kind of pushing new boundaries, to sort of use floaty language. So what's been interesting in recent months then is that where the procurement conversation was at the start of 2020 was one of hope, was one of becoming more and more digitally enabled. Yes, it's kind of fallen behind compared to other areas of business, but they were still having those conversations, and the money and the investments were still being made into tech. And so I've started asking people, well, what's COVID done in the sense of, has it forced you to go backwards? Has it forced you to sort of stop looking at innovation and refocus on just surviving as a business? And for some, of course, yes, that's just been a natural consequence of it. But for others, actually, because of that appetite, because of the work they've been doing in recent years, COVID has come along and has kind of backed that up. Has kind of said, executives have gone where they may have been a little, not reluctant, but they may have been a little skeptical before. They've seen what procurement's been doing in recent years and how that's helped survive this situation as best as possible and thrive in this situation. And I think, while we don't have full answers yet as to what the future is going to hold, and we don't know whether procurement by the next few years is just kind of going to revert to being the laggard behind other areas, it'll be fascinating to see whether it continues. And I think my question to you was going to be, how has, you talked about building a business during a pandemic, building a business where you kind of had to sort of be at home. How has that changed the conversations? So you've kind of obviously, you're experienced and you've sort of had conversations prior to where you are now. How have they been changed entirely for the better because of COVID? How has that sort of forced people and businesses to say, well, before we were considering AI, now we absolutely have to consider AI? Like, how has that changed?
I think there's definitely a few things there. And before I come on to that, I was just going to say you used the word a moment ago, thrive, and that's a word that we often use when we're talking to potential users or partners or investors, is not just how can businesses, and in our case, in this case, procurement teams, not just how can they survive, but actually how can they thrive? And, pandemic or no pandemic, we believe that if we go back, we believe that depending on the numbers that you look at, 70, 80 or 90% of startups fail within the first year. We think that's scandalous. And if it takes, months, if not years, to create partnerships, then then surely there must be technologies that can be created to help more businesses to survive and then thrive. I think that it's been interesting speaking to some businesses who are in survival mode, and obviously we understand the reasons for that. But there are other businesses who have taken the mindset of, okay, how can we now pivot our business model now to actually thrive? And we've seen a number of businesses actually thriving, which is great. Our perspective is that, once again, now is that surely with the global pandemic, if now's not the time, then God knows when it will be, for businesses to look long and hard, albeit they don't have to take a long time to do so, but look long and hard about how were they doing business before, and how can they do business in a better, more effective way going forward? Because as we all know, as we all talk about around the kitchen table, around the dining room table, that a lot of us aren't going to go back to the normal ways of working. We're not going to go back to offices. So this way of working is probably going to be maintained in some way, shape, or form. We speak to global businesses on a daily basis, and a lot of them are telling us that their companies are not going to go back to their offices before the end of the year, and if they do, then they might go in once every couple of weeks. So that has a fundamental impact on how businesses and teams and cultures are created. And so we're hopeful that we're going to start to see businesses, in this case procurement teams, say, right, we need to change and adopt our ways of working. So I'm hopeful that will be the case. But we'll see.
The conversations that people will have had around AI with yourself, and obviously with other people in other businesses, would have changed entirely because of COVID kind of removing the physical element of, for example, procurement. So procurement's very relationship based. People before would have been like, yeah, well, AI is going to come along and remove that relationship and that physical part of it. So that would have influenced and informed the conversation originally. But now with COVID, it's almost made people wake up and be like, actually, okay, while the physical stuff isn't going to go away forever, AI definitely has its place. So I was just wondering how COVID has kind of, I want to say made it easier to kind of convince, so to speak, people that AI and machine learning is something that they absolutely have to have as part of their business.
I think for us, people are certainly a lot more open to having conversations about how technologies, in our case, our matching platform, can help them to accelerate their business efforts. And I would say that as a result of when we launched the business in March, we started raising awareness of us around about June time, and the reason we did that was because we wanted people to start to obviously get to hear about what we're doing, so that they can sign up and then hopefully become users. So we started PR activity in about June, and we targeted financial press and national and international press in order to start to kind of raise awareness of what we're doing. And in our case, starting to say, we're building this platform that can help businesses and procurement teams to really radically accelerate the time it takes to create partnerships. And we've been fortunate enough to be picked up by a number of leading press in that area. And at the end of any interview that we do, or at the end of any piece that's written about us, we ask people to, if they're interested, to sign up for early beta access, as I mentioned earlier, at www.findr.global. And we've seen an extraordinary amount of very, very large and very well-known global businesses, as well as startups, sign up for early beta access. As a result of that press, we've had many, many leading banks sign up, many financial institutions sign up. So we're seeing, so that for me demonstrates there is an appetite there, that people want, they want to know more about, in our case, Findr. They want to know more about, more broadly, how they can accelerate their partnership efforts. And so, but the proof of the pudding will, of course, be whether they use and engage. And we're obviously working through how we do all of that, and we've got a very clear plan to do it. But in our case, the technology will be there. It's going to simply be a question of how, in particular larger corporates, how quickly they can perhaps cut through their own internal processes and systems to simply use technologies like Findr. If they can just throw, if they can, I'm not suggesting that they should be reckless, of course, because obviously businesses need do due diligence with technologies that they're going to be working with. But I'd like to see some of them just take the plunge a little bit and just try using technologies like Findr and see the results that it can bring. But in our case, so we're very hopeful that Findr is going to be embraced, because we've had lots of businesses sign up already. So that's a good early sign. And hopefully, when they see the benefits that we can offer to them, in this case, radically cutting down the time it takes to create partnerships, then they'll want to use it more and more and more and more and more. So our goal will be from the outset, from October when we launched our beta group, getting as many kind of case studies, proof points, data points as we can, which we can then go back to other potential users and say, hey, with Findr, business A was able to connect with business B and within 24 seconds. With business C and with business D, they were able to get a POC up and running within 7 days. So we will very quickly show. And this is where some of the AI kicks in, show data points and case studies that will in turn convince new users to sign up, which hopefully will then change behaviors. Because I think for me, it will still come down to legacy behaviors and views within organizations about, they say we want to do business in a different way. They say that we want to digitize processes. They say that we want to transform the way that we work, and they say that we want to accelerate. Well, now we're going to be offering a tool, and I'm looking forward to seeing other tools coming to the market and coming to the fore, which can help them to do that. So the question will be back to the businesses to say, right, here's the tools. Are you now going to embrace them? So I think the behaviour change is going to be more important than the technological advancement. And what do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. I think, to sort of repeat what you've kind of said, the appetite is there. People want it. It's very clear. It's just there's that kind of disconnect where it's the behavioural things, because procurement, for one, has been something that's kind of been done the exact same way for a very, very long time, and people and businesses have been very successful in doing that. So even though there's a need to change, and even though there's a need to do things differently through technology, and people are aware of that, there is always, much like any form of change, there is always going to be that sort of difficulty in. It's like, people talk about legacy systems. It's a legacy culture. It's a legacy mindset. So I think the more we see things and technologies, and such as Findr, I think the further those transformations will go, and those behavioural changes will be more impactful. Just because it's a funny one. I wish I had you'll have to forgive the rambling answer. I wish I had an answer, because as much as I speak to people, everybody says something different, which kind of indicates that there's no obvious way to fix it. It's not a problem, so to speak, but there's no obvious way to just make things and make people go, yeah, let's invest. Yeah, let's embrace. It's just slowly getting there, which, to spin it back on you, I would say I'm always curious. The maturity is something that comes up a lot in conversations, whether it's a procurement maturity, whether it's a maturity of a business. In terms of AI, so yeah, people are talking about AI, people want to invest in AI, and there are examples of AI being used, whether, like you said earlier, whether they are really showcasing AI or they're just AI almost under another name. What do you think, or how far away do you think, again, based on your experience and speaking with procurement people, how far away do you think we really are in terms of AI being a norm and there being a sense of maturity in terms of how AI is utilized across procurement functions worldwide, not just in one or two businesses?
That's a brilliant question. I'd probably answer it by saying that, using our own case, the technology is being built, and the technology will be there from October. So that's a specific point in time. And then in our case, we've obviously got a plan for it to launch it, starting with our offering it to our beta group, and then launching into the financial services industry in Q1 next year. So that technology is going to be there. I'm aware of some other technologies which are already there. So the technologies are already either there or in our case they're emerging, which will allow businesses and specifically procurement teams to do things more effectively, and hopefully quicker, and hopefully more cost effectively, all of the above. The recurring theme, I think, of this conversation of our chat has been one of behaviour change, and particularly amongst larger organisations who talk a good game, but will they embrace the technologies that are already here and that are coming, such as Findr, are they really going to embrace it? And are they just going to have a look at it, and are they really going to give it a go? And are they really going to embrace it? And I don't. So I don't. For me, it's not about the technology. And in fact, I would also say, for me, I think a bit of a curveball is I'm not. I wouldn't, as a business that wants to accelerate my growth, I wouldn't be interested in whether a business whether a technology has AI, machine learning, or whatever it may be. All I'm interested in as a business is that I can use something to help me accelerate and grow. In our case, connecting key decision makers within businesses that have got specific projects or requirements. So if the technology allows me to do that, then that's fantastic. But I would encourage CEOs and executive teams to really challenge their procurement teams to see how they can change their behaviours. And as we all know, to create behaviour change, there has to be either an incentive or a what's the other one? An incentive or a consequence. And whilst we wouldn't ever advocate consequences, I think executive teams within larger corporates in particular perhaps could take a look at how they can incentivise their procurement teams to change their behaviours, and there's all sorts of ways to do that. I mean, if we look at the pandemic, I mean, that talk about behaviour change en masse. People have changed their behaviours. For example, we've seen contactless payments in the UK go up from 50% to about 75%, or digital payments, I should say, go up from 50% to 25%, from 50% to 75%, literally overnight, because people don't want to go out. So that's how the pandemic has changed people's behaviours en masse. So so my view is that organisations need to look at how they can maintain this kind of behaviour change that we're seeing, filtering down to how procurement teams can adopt technologies almost immediately to help their businesses to grow. So I'd almost say, maybe executive teams and CEOs should just be saying to procurement teams, right, just drop all of your processes that you had before. I mean, procurement teams would probably be screaming into their tea that I'm saying this, but just get rid of all the processes that we had before, and just find us technologies that can help us to accelerate. So I think that's a long, probably rambling way of saying, I think it will all come down to behaviours. How can businesses change their behaviours of their stakeholders in a way that allows them to embrace technology such as Findr without any question? Well, not without any question, of course, but remove as many barriers as they possibly can to using technologies like ours.
I appreciate you saying that. When you said about sort of procurement professionals sort of spitting into their tea, like that's kind of I'm not saying we're out here trying to challenge them, and like you said earlier, we're not making them out to be the bad guys in any way, but that kind of echoes your point about how if people are almost shocked and dare we say offended, then that perhaps suggests that they need to sort of, like we've just been talking about, re-examine their approach and their behavioural mindsets to how procurement and business should be done. So, I'm all for certain things that might, again, not cause offence, but cause people to have a conversation that they perhaps wouldn't have had, had they not heard this podcast or embraced something.
I was just about to jump in because you said something which I'm really passionate about, which is, and I was going to go on to make more of a controversial point, which is if procurement teams, I think one of the, again, spitting into the tea moment for the all procurement guys, but I have wondered, particularly in my corporate career, whether, because there's a desire so often for procurement teams to demonstrate the value that they add, that sometimes they can make a rod for their own backs by creating all of these processes that their wider stakeholders have to kind of use in order to demonstrate that value. But those processes are often not, many of them are obviously very important, but they can be seen as, going back to the early part of our conversation, they can be seen as holding the wider teams back, which really frustrates these wider teams, whether they're innovation teams or partnerships teams or whoever they might be. And I remember, when I was at Visa, and I've got a very good relationship with the procurement team at Visa as was, so hopefully they won't defriend me after this. But I remember sometimes I could do things a lot quicker without them. Not all the time, but sometimes. And so when I was running my partnerships team, and if I could do things quicker myself, then I would do so, and I'd encourage my team to do the same thing. So there is a risk that if procurement teams perhaps don't modify their behaviours, and then at the same time embrace technologies that can help their wider stakeholders and unshackle themselves from this kind of view of having to always demonstrate the value that they're adding, then if they don't kind of do those things and embrace tools like Findr, then maybe they'll find that wider stakeholders will just use technologies like Findr directly. Now, that's probably quite a controversial thing to say, and I'm probably at risk of having all sorts of potential users listening to this podcast never using Findr ever. But I do think there is a risk that if the procurement teams don't embrace the technologies that are coming alongside changing their behaviours to not worry about the value that they're adding and just simply saying, we've got tools like Findr, just use it, rather than creating processes which can slow down the impacts of those very technologies.
That leads me nicely into sort of a final question, and a nice easy one for you, because you've obviously mentioned it throughout and you have told us where we can access and find out more, but just sort of so listeners can understand, and if they do want to take part, where can they find about the beta? Where can they find out more about the business? What's the best place for them to go to?
Yes, no, we've set up. Thanks, Dale. We've set up a landing page where people can sign up for early beta access at www.findr.global. That's Findr with spell FINDR.global, and we're going to keep that group updated with an email every few weeks, and then come October when we launch, we'll offer Findr to that group as the first users, and we'll probably offer some free discovery calls and some free matches as part of it. So if your listeners would like to sign up, we would love them to sign up, and then we can see, maybe dare I say even challenge, to see how procurement teams embrace us or not.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Insight Podcast in association with the Interface.net and CPOstrategy.com. The Digital Insight is brought to you by B2E Media Limited. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe, rate and review, and don't forget to check out our podcast archive at www.b2e-media.com/The Digital Insight.